What do you get when you mix 1 part philosophy, 1 part politics, and cut it with a healthy shot of history?
You get the perfect podcast cocktail. Thank you for listening.
Now sit back, open your drinks, and open your minds. This is Six Pack Philosophy.
Welcome to Six Pack Philosophy with Mike and John. I'm Anastasia, and this week we are discussing brainwashing, propaganda, education, and the ethics therein. But before we get started, what are we drinking, guys?
We are drinking Dunkel.
From the Warsteiner Brewing Company in Warstein, Germany.
I am excited.
What's the ABV of this?
ABV is...
Not enough.
4.8.
All
Like
right.
I said.
John, while we're opening this up, why don't you tell us about a Dunkel a little bit, what you know?
Yeah, a Dunkel is a traditional style of German beer. German beer being some of the best beer in the world. And it depends a little bit on where you are when you ask for a Dunkel in Germany on what you get. Dunkel is a very traditional style. It's usually a lager brewed with a lot of malts if you're near Bavaria. If you're in other parts of Germany and you ask for a Dunkel, it translates to dark beer. They may just give you whatever dark beer is on tap with without some of the constraints. So because whenever this beer style came about, the only real rules were the Reinheitsgebot or about? Anyway,
I don't remember now.
I'm not German.
Reinheitsgebot.
Yeah, that limited the ingredients you can make on all beers. It didn't talk about different styles.
That's the German purity law?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because of that, the definition of the style has drifted regionally, but it is agreed upon across the board that it is a dark beer, and it's almost always a low ABV beer as well.
Okay, yeah. So a dark beer that you can drink several of. So
Yes.
That's an interesting way.
And it's probably delicious because it's German.
It's got a killer smell. Yeah,
It's got a pretty good taste too.
it does. It does.
All
But
right,
we'll
so-
talk more about that later.
Brainwashing.
Brainwashing, yes.
I gotta be honest. When y'all brought this to me, I went, "Oh man, is this really in our wheelhouse?" And then I got reading on it, and I was like, "Oh my
And it
god,
totally
this
is.
is fascinating
I
stuff." I'll tell you from the very beginning, my opinion drifted a lot as I was doing the research on this. So, where exactly are we going to start on this one, John?
So I want to start with the definition.
That's
'cause
exactly what I was
I'm
gonna
just
say.
going to jump
John.
on top of John.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
So you found the definition. Because
That's how this whole mess started. We don't need to go back there again.
I jumped on
Silly.
top of John earlier, so it was all okay.
So I did find a definition. It's a fairly broad definition.
Now, is this from a dictionary or some medical publication?
It is from the dictionary.
Okay.
It is from dictionary.com.
Oh, perfect.
The dictionary.
The only
The
one worth
dictionary.
reading.
Yeah. Who gives a shit about Merriam-Webster anymore? Except for, sitting on when you're short and you're trying to drive. But so the definition is to make someone adopt radically different beliefs by using systematic and often forcible pressure.
Forcible. Okay.
Well, it said often forcible.
Yeah.
Correct.
So according to that, any kind of systematic way of changing somebody's beliefs is brainwashing, right?
Brainwashing.
So
and they also got the point of what does force mean?
Right.
Is force physical? Is force mental? Is force
So under that very definition, this podcast, both to each other and to our listeners, we're brainwashing.
Not necessarily, because
Okay.
it also requires it to be radically different. And we aren't forcing people, or we aren't attempting to force people to change their minds.
That's what
we are attempting to get
maybe
them.
you're not. Maybe you're not. John and I go in the back room after we get through, and we backmask some secret messages on the back. So if you play this backwards, there's all kinds of messages.
You know what? We
They're
should do
gonna
an
be-
episode about subliminal messaging because it's bullshit and everybody needs to know that.
It's not bullshit. But anyway,
Sounds like a show.
yeah. Well, but see, the forcible was optional. So that's
Yeah.
my first point. So whether or not
Often forcible.
often, it means
means
optional.
optional, yeah.
So yes, you're correct. It's optional. So the forcible doesn't matter. It talks about radical change I would argue two things. One, I would argue that from episode to episode, the change we have on any individual may be radical or it may not be, right? It depends on...
It's been radical on me on a few episodes.
Yeah, it depends on where that individual is at and what the show is, first of all. Second of all, the other thing that I would argue is that radical is a very subjective thing, right? To give you an example, there are plenty of political parties, if you look at broader than just the main two, where people have...
There's more than two?
Well, that's another show.
Okay.
Anyway.
One was probably done.
Where people have had broad agreement with another party, but there was one thing, it's usually a handful of issues, we can pick on abortion real quick. And because they had this one small difference of opinion, they've looked at the fundamentals of that party as radically different, right? But then somebody else could look at it and say, well, you agree on 9 points. And so what radical means is subjective. So,
and I'll agree with you that in the public sphere it is, but when looking at brainwashing psychologically, it's a bit more well defined.
Do you have any kind of background or?
So to kind of give an example, one of the things that was observed in the Korean War was when American soldiers were brought out of the POW camps. They expected them to hear a lot of stories about, how poorly treated they were and how awful everything was. And a fair number of them, a significant number of them, came out espousing the goodness, the
virtues.
Virtue, that's the word I'm looking for, of communism.
Yeah.
And that was a radical change. It was, a change from supporting capitalism and thinking, that we had to go out eradicating communism from the world, and coming out of those POW camps and holding the opposite belief.
Yeah, well, and it sounds very much like Stockholm Syndrome in that particular case to me. But if your definition is a radical change in belief, we can look at much more mundane things that have happened through history. The hippie movement. I'll give you one that's way back. The change in the Pledge of Allegiance from the Bellamy Salute to believing that was the epitome of evil
Absolutely.
just a few years later.
Absolutely. If you're not familiar, when the Pledge of Allegiance was first created, the Pledge of Allegiance was actually written by a socialist pastor. And it was written as a way to encourage nationalism and patriotism towards the United States.
It was a means of propaganda.
It was propaganda, without a doubt. And they did what they called the Bellamy Salute, which, if you can imagine the Nazi salute.
That's the Nazi salute.
Well, it was with the hand up towards God, And if you watch old pictures, you see these school kids with their hands up, looking very much like the Nazi salute, and that remained the way we did things until Hitler's rise to power and the redefinition of Nazis as evil. In which case we went to the hand over the heart salute, and kept the pledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a good example of brainwashing, because the national anthem is something that is. Contrary people say it's not required to recite under any law. There's nobody that requires it. From state to state, they have different laws. In Texas, it has to be said. It has to be recited by somebody at some point during the day, and the kids have to hear it. But there's no requirement that they stand and put their hand over their heart.
Though there is drastic social pressure.
There are teachers that require it, which is wrong, without a doubt. But I think the fact that they're requiring somebody to pledge at a time when they don't really understand what they are can meet the definitions of brainwashing.
Under this definition.
Under that definition, yeah.
Well, see, and that's where it gets to be really interesting, because oh hell, I didn't write down. Yes, I did. Edward Hunter wrote a book called Brainwashing. In which, and at the time, and I didn't actually write down when this book came out, I believe it was the late 1800s, but was considered to be well, first of all, he coined the term brainwashing, but he was the person who knew the stuff on it. And he stipulated 2 requirements for something to fall under the umbrella of brainwashing. The first of which being the person adopts new beliefs and ideas that are drastically different from and often antithetical to their previous beliefs. And that, I think, is a clearer definition than just saying radical. Often antithetical. Exactly.
But it still says often.
Yeah.
It does. It does. And the second being that the person does not adopt these new beliefs gradually over a period of months or years, but instead in a very short time span and a lot of times even instantaneously.
Now I have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That definition, I think, I think is bullshit. I think
Okay.
I think that doesn't happen. Where you can come in and through conditioning or I don't know, some magic words or something, convince somebody to change their beliefs to where it is something antithetical to their previous beliefs in an almost instantaneous manner. That doesn't seem like a plain
Well,
possible.
I think I've seen it all the time.
Okay.
We've sat here, any one of us come to the table with a certain belief, and in the hour span of the show, walked away and said, I think the other guy might be right.
Yeah.
Was that a form of brainwashing?
nice
Except
catch.
I don't think that it's ever something that is antithetical to your core beliefs. I think in those cases you're appealing to core beliefs and you're explaining something. That's a different situation. You're not changing somebody's core beliefs. You're not changing somebody from a capitalist to a communist. You're not changing somebody in that kind of manner with that.
Well, and as the study of brainwashing kind of progressed, one of the things that they found that did in fact cause people's beliefs to do a 180 really, really quickly was putting them in extreme states of stress, fear, anger, anxiety, at which point what they talked about was, and it was actually explored by Pavlov, with the dogs that he was training
Pavlov's
to drool.
dog, yeah.
Exactly. So after he did those experiments, he went on to, rather than explore the physiological side of it, explore the psychological and the neurological side of it, and found that if he put the dogs in a really high stress environment, that he was able to almost instantaneously break down their previous conditioning, to where not only would they not do it, but they would almost refuse to do it. But so that's where they're coming from, saying that it's a really quick or an even sometimes instantaneous change in your beliefs because you've been pushed to the point of breaking.
Okay, so I want to kind of roll back the show just a little bit and give kind of my experience in researching this. The first thing I did when I approached this topic was I read the entire wiki. Mm-hmm. And the Wikipedia actually operates a lot more under the first definition you read. And as you read through it, it gives a bunch of examples of where pitfalls in that definition occur, and then goes on to explain that the vast majority of psychological experts don't recognize brainwashing, that it is, in fact, it says in the very beginning, a non-scientific term. Mm-hmm. And talks about various criticisms that psychological experts have given to the courts for entertaining the idea, and to what they call expert witnesses for witnessing on this kind of idea. And after reading everything on that and looking into some ancillary material, I came to the conclusion that I agreed with the general consensus that this isn't a thing, right? Under that definition. And even under the radical change definition, I find a bunch of holes in it that where I can point to other stuff and say, but this kind of stuff happens all the time. Maybe not as often. We've narrowed it down some more, but all the time. It wasn't until I got here to this point of talking about emotionally pushing somebody, adding an emotional stress element. And when you add that emotional stress element, I can now talk about a definition of brainwashing that isn't so vast as to be meaningless, to basically mean I changed your mind.
Well, and I do want us to really differentiate two different levels of brainwashing, or two different terms, brainwashing, that we're talking about. Because I do think that we being the general public, use the term brainwashing really loosely. A lot like we were diagnosing every kid in the world with ADHD for a while. We have basically kind of come to the point where anybody who does not think the way that we think is a sheeple, is brainwashed. They are well, I guess a shill is paid, but, they are so stupid and so indoctrinated to the other side's beliefs that they aren't even willing to consider it. And that is different. That is grossly different than the much more narrow definition of brainwashing itself.
I believe brainwashing is a thing, but I'll tell you, my definition of brainwashing is in my mind, it's different. Mm-hmm. To me, brainwashing is any time conditioning would be a better word for me.
And I think conditioning is different.
But that's what I'm doing in my mind. When I think about brainwashing, I'm thinking about where somebody uses outside forces to condition you to believe something else. Mm-hmm. And or condition. I think belief is essential. Condition you to fundamentally believe. Now, if they're conditioning you to do something else, that's not brainwashing. You can condition anything to follow orders, but you're not really changing their fundamental beliefs.
We want to talk for just a little bit. We've kind of explored three definitions. We want to talk for just a little bit and helping us decide what is real brainwashing, the history of the term, and where it came from.
Sure.
The very first time that this term was used in any language, as far as we know, and in a very positive light, was in China. And I forget which dynasty it was, but one of the Chinese governments was using it, and it was talking about getting people in line with the state's way of thinking. And they were actually referencing, and this is something we've done a show on before, Taoism, however you decide to say it.
This is Maoist China.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were referencing Taoism, where Taoism talks about cleansing your spirit and mind. Well, they were talking about cleansing the mind of the population, making it clean.
And this was during the Korean War?
No, way before then.
Well, this is Maoism. It would have been before it, but not significantly before.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're talking about cleansing the minds of the population, but in a religious reference, actually in a positive way. Like, we'll all have clean minds. English doesn't pick up the term until about the 50s. It starts to gain traction in the 50s in the U.S. And where it really continues its traction and keeps going, we have the examples with wars that we talked about previously, but it then starts being co-opted. We see a growth in this country in new religious movements, as they were called then. Some people were calling them cults, but New Age religion is more or less what we're talking about here. And you start to see people who are unhappy with these new religions, calling them brainwashing cults, using a lot of negative terminology toward them.
It actually was popularized in the United States by the movie The Manchurian Candidate, an old Frank Sinatra movie in the 1950s about a candidate who was captured by the Japanese during World War II and was raised up to go on. He ends up running for president and all this as a spy. Yeah. So that was kind of what popularized that word in our society. But then they apply it to the Moonies and all the different groups in the 1960s. And the U.S. did something different. It was largely our Central Intelligence Agency that started using that term brainwashing as a negative, as a weapon against counterculture.
Yeah. And it was such a powerful idea that the government even becomes really curious with this. They start a bunch of well-known experiments to try to make a science out of brainwashing so they can apply it themselves. We know about MK Ultra. Results of that were never published, so we don't know how successful they are, though I think we can assume, based on the amount of dissidents within the population right now, they weren't super duper successful. Also, that's actually the origin of the drug LSD, acid. They were trying to use it as a brainwashing tool for people, and college students they were trying it out on, some of them were chemistry students, and they said, man, this got me really high. They resynthesized it in a lab, and it breaks out into...
Dr. Timothy Leary, yeah. He said that LSD was the perfect drug. It had no side effects, and you couldn't be addicted to it. Boy, he was wrong.
Yeah.
I watched a killer documentary about him.
Yeah, so that's the origin of LSD. And so the government actually starts to kind of get in on this and wanting to utilize it for itself, which...
Well, I mean, obviously that would be a tantalizing idea for any government.
Yeah, and I think we can safely assume that they had, at the best, limited success, because one thing we would...
At that level, yes.
Yeah, because one thing we would expect to see in mass, we have seen a trend that way, but we haven't seen it in mass. If somebody was truly successful at like a really scientifically rigorous brainwashing program, is we would expect world conflict to drop sharply. Because if you no longer have to kill somebody, you can just change their brain.
I think you would expect domestic conflict
Yeah.
to drop sharply. I don't know about world conflict, but domestic conflict, I think you would expect to drop sharply.
Yeah, because you have to
less
infiltrate
civil
another
wars.
government and
Yeah.
gain mass access to their people and yada yada.
Well, all you'd have to do is gain access to their politicians, and after you infect them, you can infect downward easily. I mean,
Yeah,
that's not
yeah,
a problem.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we know that governments have access to each other across. I mean, there's
Lots of cases of toppling governments like that.
Yeah, so-
absolutely. Hey, I want to kind of move this into some specific examples. But you want to talk about this beer first because I've almost finished the first one.
Oh yeah, let's. Do you want to go first since you're nearly done?
Yeah, sure. I'll go here. This is Vorsteiner Dunkel from Vorstein, Germany, the Vorsteiner Brewing Company. Again, a Dunkel is it's a dark beer, but in this case it's a pretty light dark beer. Let me get a drink here real quick. This is I really like this beer.
Yeah.
It's if I'm going to give it any kind of a hit, it's a little thinner than I like my beers, but it's not something that's gonna damage my ranking of it at all.
Yeah.
It's
well, and like I said, most of them are lager style brews.
Yeah, but it's got a woody flavor to it that I like. There's a little bit of bitterness, but it's gone quickly. It's not that long bitterness on the afterside. The aftertaste is gone almost immediately, which is kind of something I like with a beer. It doesn't linger with you. However, that does make you want to drink it that much faster to get that flavor back there again. You can I don't know how to explain this, but when you get it in your mouth, you can feel it all the way in your head because the smells and all get up there, and you just get this.
It is an overall experience.
It is a great overall experience. I am really, really a fan of this. I'm probably going to give it a ranking a little higher than most of you are because of that. This is definitely higher than a benchmark beer. If your benchmark's a 2.5, I'm going to give it a 3.4.
Wow.
Okay. 3-4. I agree on so many points. You mentioned it having a little bit of bitter. These styles of beer have a lot of barley. That's going to translate to a little bit of sweet for anything that the yeast doesn't eat up. But the bitters are from the barley. They're not from strong hops. So because of that hop is where you get that bitter that kind of lingers. And like you said, it comes, it goes, it's balanced out nicely with the sweet. It's got that dark flavor. It is a lager style beer, so like you said, it's going to be light. I really enjoy this beer. It's got a nice color. It's got a nice clarity. It definitely wasn't bottle conditioned. You can tell that because of the amount of clarity. I think I've told my story here. I'll tell it again really quickly. But we traveled through Germany on a short time, come back from Italy, and we were in the airport. We were drinking beers, actually sitting outside the gate, watching the line, drinking our beers, and then got to run onto the plane. But we flew on this flight called Lufthansa that they all but give beers away, and coach.
All but my ass.
They're like, hey, we got a half bottle of wine here. Who wants wine? you know. And
It was fantastic.
But the lady comes out with the cart, and she said, "What kind of beer do you want?" Well, I don't know any German beers, so I said, "I don't know. Give me a wheat beer." She said, "A wheat beer?" I said, "Yeah, just give me a wheat beer." She said,
This dumbass doesn't know beer.
"Sir, all beer is wheat beer." I said, "I like the way you think. Give me a beer." And she did. I really enjoyed it. I have not drank a German beer that I didn't like. So all that to say, support your local German style beer.
Your local
German
German
style beer.
style. Okay.
Yeah.
So your local German beer.
I had this.
Move to Germany.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, go visit Oktoberfest. But I had this number in my head already, so I'm actually gonna beat you out 3-5.
Okay.
Yeah.
My goodness. Okay. So I think you guys have said everything that there is to say about this beer. I have found it immensely enjoyable. I've had a hard time not drinking it faster. Of course, with the low ABV, that does make it pretty easy. And it makes it easy to have a conversation like this while enjoying a really good beer, without getting so snockered that you can't carry on an intelligible conversation.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that I've been stuttering this whole time. But stuttering, not slurring, and that's the important part. I do think I'm going to come down. Actually, I'm going to come down right where Mike was. I was going to say I was going to come in at a 3.3, but I think that 0.1, I think it really does deserve it. It is far better than a standard benchmark. I think there are some things like getting a little bit more body with it. The flavor is roasty and robust, but I'd kind of like to have just a hair more oomph to it. But I do like it a lot, so it gets a 3.4.
The flavor profile is pretty flat. It doesn't have that rise in the middle that you expect. And you know, I think that's what I'm looking for a little bit, if anything.
Yeah, something I'll say about this, and all German beer generally, about German culture generally, whenever you talk about engineering and building something, Germans just do it the best. They're the most precise. Now they are shit when it comes to production time. They will take forever on one piece, but that piece is done right. And something that I'll say specifically about their beer, they do the same thing there. They take their time. They do it right. They don't put out a bad product. But in America, we have a tendency to do everything in extremes. Everything's got to be bigger, louder, higher ABV. I like, generally with German beers, now not to say that they don't have some high ABV ones out there, but they can make a really quality beer, and it doesn't have to be every time like 20% ABV or something. And that they can get those flavors in there, and they can do it in a subtle manner that's not smacking you in the face. Now, we've had some smack you in the face beers that were excellent, but this is a real conversational beer. I guess that leads into my date question of what beer is this? This is a flex beer. You can use it on any date. Yeah. And if she doesn't like it, get her out of there and keep the beer.
Yeah, right. If she doesn't like it, then the beer is better than the babe.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, lawnmower beer? No, not really a lawnmower beer, but
it's not far off.
But it you know what it's really good for? It's really good for sitting on the porch after you mow the lawn.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could totally drink this on a lawnmower.
I could, but it's not probably
early in the season.
What I want to drink late in the, you know, I'm looking for something. I'm looking for something more watery when I'm doing that. So, but you know, it's really good beer. Yeah.
What?
Is it gonna? It's your turn. Is it gonna get you laid?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely, 100%. I do want to say what I do like about the fact that it is kind of a lower ABV, and to kind of follow what you said about German beers generally, I really enjoy the fact that that these beers are well made. They are high quality. Many times, you know, there's long been a perception in the U.S., you know, I guess probably following all the propaganda to stay semi on topic here, of the prohibitionary, you know, drinking is just for drunkards who want to, you know, get fucked up. You know, this low ABV beer that has a really good flavor is really more about the enjoyment of the drink itself and then the atmosphere that you have around it, not so much about getting shit-faced.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
which is what I want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to keep my wits about me.
Yeah.
I have
Every
so
once
few
in a
wits
while.
as it is.
Every once in a while, it's fun. But by and large, when I sit down with a beer, I'm not looking to get shit-faced.
Speaking of wits, if you want to hear more about German style beer, next week we are going to have a German style wit beer on the show, so you can
Yeah.
have some wits about you on that one.
There
too.
you go. There you go.
It's been a while since we've had a... Oh, no. It's a Hefeweizen.
Oh, is it Oh,
It is a Hefeweizen. It's been a while since we've had a Hefeweizen.
That's cool
Okay.
too. That's
Yay.
cool too. All right.
So anyway, back to this.
We're going back to brainwashing
Yes.
a little bit, and I wanted to talk about the military experience a little bit because I remember as a young Marine at Paris Island, my very first day in boot camp, we got called into the drill instructor big meeting, and the senior drill instructor came out, and I remember him saying that we are going to make Marines out of you because the Marine Corps is the single greatest brainwashing unit in the world. He said that, and I kind of laughed about it, but I got thinking about it. And the man I was when I went in to boot camp and the man I was when I came out were vastly different people. Do I think it changed my fundamental beliefs? I don't know that it changed my fundamental beliefs, but it definitely changed changed my actions on those beliefs. And I got thinking while you were talking earlier, why was that possible? And the conditions that you talked about there were all there: physical stress, emotional stress, isolation from the world. You didn't get letters from home for the first month, I think it was.
Yeah.
And they shut you off from society and they broke you down until you were a broken mess. And then they put you back together in the way they wanted you to, by giving you a little bit at a time. We're going to give you a little privilege here. We're going to give you a little bit there. We're going to make you earn this. And through the physical conditioning and the emotional strain of lack of sleep, isolation, men in your face yelling at you, physical work, you are a changed person. And I believe,
And it's over a very short period of time.
it is over 12 weeks. So,
Yeah.
very, very short period of time, 3 months. But it's not overnight.
Right.
It's not hypnosis, but it's the next thing to it, I think. And I think that meets the definition of brainwashing. What are your thoughts on that now?
Well, kind of going back to what I said earlier, the first two definitions we went over, I'm sorry, it's just not cutting it for me. I'm not buying that that's a thing, but I can kind of buy into the third one. And if you talk only about the third one, yeah, I think you're right. I think we're talking about that now. Now, I do have some complaints with us looking at this as a negative. I can go into some of those unless there's some more you want to talk about on this.
No, I just kind of wanted to throw it out there at you because I've been through that experience and see if if y'all believe that met the definition of brainwashing.
I think it does, and I think it is absolutely essential for an effective military.
Well,
I don't like it, but I think it's essential for an effective military.
I think it's important, and I think that the thing that stuck in my mind is, you talk about it being a negative. Clearly, the Marine Corps didn't see that as a negative because
Right.
my senior drill instructor bragged that we're the single greatest brainwashing organization in the world.
Yeah.
And obviously they're not seeing it as a negative. And I don't think it was at least for me in that case.
Yeah, so what they really talk about in this third definition is emotionally.
What was the third definition again?
It involved emotionally stressing somebody before introducing the new idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you talk about emotionally stressing somebody, this can actually be done a variety of ways. Now, the way that a lot of people think of is like the old famous Star Trek episode where Picard's sitting there and he's being told to say there are 3 lights and there are 4, and he's just being mentally fucked with until he finally breaks and says there are the 3 lights, and then they were going to reintroduce information into him, or the military idea. But that's actually not the only way that this comes about. And in fact, it was funny whenever we talked about this, because there is a wide swath of things where we introduce an idea into somebody's head, And the very first step in that is to get them emotionally charged. Now, this can be done in a variety of ways. You can do this in a church. You can sit there and say, you're all going to burn in hell if you do this, and you can kind of break them down that way. But the other way I've seen this, people getting emotionally charged, is Martin Luther King's speech, where he gets the crowd really riled up cheering. Sermon on the Mount stuff.
Independence Day.
Yeah, Independence Day.
Yeah.
We're all, and then you say, okay, now that you're all emotionally charged, go do this. And we've all been there. We've been to this speech, and then for 3 days we're like, yeah, I want to do this. And then on the fourth day we're like,
A church revival.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, advocated inducing fear and anxiety at the thought of spending eternity in hell in order to get people to convert.
Yeah, very common.
In fact, he kind of, you read some of the things that he said, and he kind of reveled in the fact that people were physically and emotionally distraught and wrecked for days at the images that he would put into their brains, and what they would see other people going through.
Not at all uncommon.
No.
It's the same thing that Tetzel did to try and raise money for indulgences that Martin Luther preached against back in 1519.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that Jonathan Edwards was doing when he wrote Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that works. It puts emotional strain on you and then says, and here's how you get out of it.
Yeah.
Something else that I've seen done. We're a podcast. We're also on YouTube. So we have metrics that drive us somewhat on listener counts and all this. Look at viral videos. I'll give you a good channel to go check out if you want to talk about emotionally riling somebody up, and then asking them to do an action as far as subscribing and liking a video. Go check out SoFlo. Go check out the SoFlo channel. You've probably seen a lot of his viral videos and not realize it's him. He goes out and pretends to be a homeless person, and one's asking for drugs, and the other one is saying I need food, and see who gives the one. He does a lot of documentaries where the homeless person always ends up giving more to people than the rich people do. He's given a house to a homeless guy by getting a fake scratch-off lottery ticket, giving it to him, having him scratch it off. He wins like $10,000. Now, the clerk at the convenience store that he turns it into is in on the whole thing, and they pay him out. And then the guy's like, well, here, I'll give you some of the money. But he kind of tickles your emotions as his entire platform. That's his entire thing. And look at the viral videos that have gone out, either touching your emotional biases politically, touching your emotional need to reach out to people. By getting people emotionally riled up in any manner, you can control their actions they take.
Right here in the United States, think about how we pushed through the Patriot Act after 9/11.
I actually wanted to talk about that because I wanted to talk about not necessarily manufacturing, whatever your thoughts are on 9/11, not necessarily manufacturing this state of fear, but
Playing on it.
yeah, using the opportunity to accentuate it. In fact, I wanted to read one of the things that George W. Bush said shortly after 9/11 that was kind of played on as a way that we were able to push through with, I mean, you look at the numbers, and I unfortunately I didn't pull them up before this episode, but you look at the numbers at the time that the Patriot Act was passed of Americans' approval of it. It was staggering considering how we kind of look at things today and we see gross divide on so many issues. But on the Patriot Act at the time, we were massively in support of it. And kind of playing on people's existing fear with 9/11, George W. Bush came out and said the terrorist directive commands them to kill Christians and Jews, to kill all Americans, and make no distinctions among military and civilians, including women and children. Really kind of putting it in people's heads, this boogeyman that was out to get them at all costs, and didn't give a shit who they were or anything as long as they ended up dead.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Well, it's not new. It's not
No,
new at
it's
all.
not new at all.
I grew up. Y'all kind of grew up in that time period with 9/11 and all. I grew up during the Cold War, and I can remember nuclear war drills. Where you know, and I've talked with it on the show before. Hiding underneath the desk, putting your head between your legs, and kissing your ass goodbye.
Yeah.
But
We've talked about generational differences between your generation and mine with relations with Cuba.
yeah,
Cuba.
Yeah. But you know, you look at this stuff and you realize that was the boogeyman for my generation, was the Soviet Union. When that collapsed, we needed a new one, and we found it in terror.
Yeah.
I don't buy the art, the created, but I think using it is something that the government does well.
Well, and let's not just pick on the government here. I mean, I think the government does plenty of it and does it well, as you said. But as I think about it, for I'm going to say some 80 to 90% of relationships that are formed in this country, how is that early stage developed? Usually, the more aggressive partner in that. Sometimes through buying gifts, sometimes through putting on the right piece of music, sometimes through whatever it is, gets the partner emotionally riled up, feeling real special, and then makes asks for either longer term relationships or maybe a sexual advancement or whatever that is. Isn't that the same technique we use in romantic approach?
Sure, Luther Vandross, baby.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the difference that would be cited here is those are typically pleasurable, whereas most brainwashing is predicated on negative feelings, fear, anxiety.
I don't think it has to be, though.
Well, and I actually kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit because I think that I forget there was an incident that I actually wanted to reference that did play on positive emotions. And the thing that we see, and we see this in a lot of different ways, but the thing that we see is that positive emotions can be used to manipulate people, to change their opinions, their ideas, and all that sort of stuff, but that fear and negativity are immensely more powerful.
Well, I think the difference in positive emotionally manipulation and negative emotional manipulation is as a necessity of maintaining positive emotions. The person has to be able to say no, right? Because if they say no and you continue, whatever you're doing, you're giving them stuff, you're giving them wine, whatever it is. And if you continue that emotion's going to flip. It's going to become a negative emotion because they don't want it anymore. So now you have to find your root. The difference with negative emotion manipulation is that is not required. From the start, they don't want it. I mean, that's why it's negative.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know where you do see it. But this idea is I think in battered women syndrome or battered spouse syndrome, where you've got that spouse that's like, what are you gonna do? You gonna do anything better than me? I'm as good as you're gonna get.
Yeah.
But let's look at positive emotion manipulation that people think is abhorrent. Okay. I go up to some kid and I say, hey, I got some candy. You want to come hang out with me? I got some candy. I got a puppy. You want to pet my puppy? It's very nice. Now, that was all positive emotion manipulation.
Yeah.
Now, are you going to sit there and tell me that that's not brainwashing?
No, I think it is. You better behave this year or Santa's not coming for you.
Absolutely.
Well,
He's
and
gonna bring
that's
you
fear.
presents.
Huh?
That's fear. Not as drastic as,
It may be fear.
Anxiety.
If you say better behave or Santa's not coming, that you're using a negative.
Yeah.
But if you say if you're good this year, Santa's going to bring you more presents. Now
Yeah.
you're doing a positive.
True.
I train
But
my
it's still-
dog. I have a little clicker. They do the right thing even accidentally. I click it. I give them a treat. I click it. I give them a treat. They associate this positive thing with the clicker, and all of a sudden I can now use this clicker to control them. I click over here. They're going over there.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that takes us into the section on public education.
Yeah.
Because when I was looking at this stuff,
Do you use clickers too? Because
I use shock collars. Yes, I think I got stuck in this YouTube hell loop when I was doing this brainwashing, where I started off looking at brainwashing, then I clicked on one and said something like brainwashing in schools.
Yeah.
And then I spent the next, hour and a half of my life looking at public school videos.
Yeah.
And as a public school teacher, I just kept getting madder and madder at this
Yeah.
stuff. But there are some conditioning there. And I like that term, conditioning. You do have a situation where the bell rings and students are expected to behave in a different manner. That's conditioning. Is it brainwashing? Well, maybe there's a threat if you don't. Do they emotionally break you down? I've had some teachers that did. And I wonder about this. Is public school an example of brainwashing? Because clearly, if you come in, in pre-K or kindergarten and you go all the way through the program, there is something that they're trying to get out of you. Mm-hmm. You have character education where they're using character to try and teach you certain things. You have the national anthem before ball games. You have the Pledge of Allegiance during the day. You have conditions where if you behave yourself, you get a reward. If you do not behave yourself, you get a demerit. Something happens. That seems to meet the definition.
Yeah, so here's my thoughts on that. I think there are some parts of public education that are brainwashing and some parts that aren't. I'm going to give you a few examples that are clearly brainwashing to me. And then I'm going to give you where I think public education could not. And then I'm going to come around and talk about why that may not be a desirable thing. All right? Things that are definitely brainwashing in school. Pep rallies. DARE program. Anytime you have, I guess Red Ribbon Week. Ribbon Week is part of the DARE program.
Anti-drug,
yeah. School dances. I think
you think school dances are brainwashing?
What the fuck?
What? Well, I mean, you bring all the students together and put them in a mostly. It's the same thing that you use in romantic situations. Now, what you're brainwashing them to do is to coalesce and become a team. You could say the same thing around football games or most sports programs. So I think there's a brainwashing element to all those. Where I think you could have, where you have a lot of situations in education that aren't brainwashing is where you sit there and give information without an emotional bias. This is going to be most of your math classes. Some manage to invoke emotion, most don't. Some, not all, of your history classes. History's a mixed bag. Some of them really get emotion involved in their class.
History can be very, very
propaganda-driven.
Propagandist, yeah.
Yeah. Some of your English classes. Now, here's the thing. We talked about, this is where I talked about, I can admit it's brainwashing, but I'm not sure we should call it a negative, because if you brainwash a student into the information of history, you've now imprinted it in such a way that they'll actually retain the information. If you give the information in a very boring, matter-of-fact, manner, then they're not going to retain it as well, but they're also not emotionally imprinted in that same manner. The drawback of that is you can imprint a lot of other stuff with the information of history, and the way the information is presented brings its own bias.
Sure,
you can
absolutely.
say as a history teacher,
you can't present it without bias.
Yeah, so you're not only imprinting the raw information, you're imprinting the bias. Here's the thing, though: school's going to take a lot longer if they don't imprint that way, because you're going to have to form the memories in a very academic manner in which you examine every single side, and you could end up in a hellhole of just trying to get through very small bits of history. So I don't know that that's necessarily a desirable trait for school, to be completely non-brainwashing, but I think that's how it could be done, and it is sometimes, and we see a lot of times that those teachers that do that, nobody wrote Mr. Holland's opus about the teacher that sat there like the Clear Eyes commercial reciting all the facts,
I don't think school is brainwashing. I think there is a lot about school that does rely on propaganda. Pep rallies, absolutely. Spirit Week, Red Ribbon Week, football games, Pledge of Allegiance, National Anthem. All of that is propaganda. I think one of the big requirement, or the big sticking points for me there is that with propaganda, with brainwashing, you are trying to change a person's perception. Whereas with kids, we put them in school at 4, 5 years old. They don't have opinions developed. They don't have minds with ideas in them already to change.
So there's 2 points there that actually I'm glad you brought up. The first thing I want to ask you, the second thing I want to ask you about is the difference in developing information and brainwashing, and why those can or can't be the same thing. But the first thing before I get into that, I want to ask you about, you mentioned intent. You said they have to be trying to do this. So let me ask you this. Yeah, you said you have to be trying to change a core belief. Now, maybe you didn't mean it that way, and this will make this answer really quick.
Okay.
If somebody like robs a bank and holds hostages for a while, and those hostages develop Stockholm Syndrome, but their goal was only to take the money, they had no goal of making these people feel warm toward them. Is that brainwashing? Can brainwashing be unintentional?
I think theoretically it could be. I think the instances of it happening unintentionally would be so few and far between as to be basically irrelevant.
I'm going to say you can be affected unintentionally,
Yes.
but it's not brainwashing. And the reason why is because grammar. Nobody ever washed anything accidentally. And I think brainwashing means that there's intent.
Yeah.
I don't know that I agree. I don't know that I disagree. It's one I have to think about, but I think it's an interesting question to talk about.
Yeah.
And I guess to more appropriately phrase what I was trying to say, their goal is, their task is to change an opinion from one thing to another, something often antithetical, whereas you're simply imparting a fresh mind with the ideas that you want that mind to hold.
So here comes my part with education, because education is an opportunity cost event, right? Anything you educate somebody, you are necessarily not using that time educating them on something else.
Sure. Everything's an opportunity cost.
So we can imagine, plenty of literature and movies where, a great one to reference now would be The Hunger Games. A little bit more relevant than some of the older stuff, where they divide society into these little factions and raise them from very small children. Your job is military, and we're going to drill that into you. Your job is caretaker. Your job is science.
Divergent might be a better option there.
Well, yeah, fine. And we kind of drill this into them from a very young age. Now,
Lord of the Flies.
Now with that, 1984.
1984. Brave New World, Aldous Huxley.
I'm in the middle of reading that right now.
My favorite book ever.
Interesting.
But with all these ideas, is it really substantively different to use the same techniques to imprint data in the first place, rather than to use a technique to overwrite data? Is that really a substantive difference to imprint it on a blank? So it is to you, Mike?
No.
Well, and I think that, and I'm sticking with the research that I looked into, and the people who studied this extensively, that that brainwashing is quick, relatively, and requires a drastic change in your thought process. With lack of better phrasing, what we subject kids to in school is propaganda. It is gradual, and it is without the extreme conditions, in most cases, that people subject to brainwashing find themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with Mike on this one.
I'm going to come back here in education, because I believe that propaganda is an example of brainwashing. I think it is. I just don't think that I don't like the term brainwashing, because I like that term conditioning. I'm going to be in this weird place where I believe there is brainwashing or propaganda in school. I think it's there. I believe it's there. I just don't necessarily believe it's wrong. I look at this and I go, Yeah, pep rallies do influence the way you think a little bit. I don't care. I care if you have to go to the pep rally. Now, I don't care if a school holds a pep rally and you want to go and you're influenced. That's great. I think football changes the way you think. A football game does. And I'm pissed if the school says everybody has to go to the football game. I don't have a problem with the school doing it. I don't have a problem with schools teaching character education. I really don't. I think teaching somebody to be part of a team and part of society is a good thing. Now, where I have a problem is whenever they're not given a choice in the matter. You've got to be able to, you've got to have a choice there in some of these aspects.
Well, and I think what you're doing here in saying that propaganda and brainwashing are the same thing, I think you are neglecting the nuances and the fact that, well, I'll say this. In my own interpretation of it, I think that propaganda and brainwashing are very closely related, and I think they all fall under the umbrella of manipulation. I think that carefully choosing the way that you say things to elicit an emotional response from somebody is not necessarily brainwashing, is not necessarily propaganda, but I do think that it's manipulation, and I think all of these fall under the umbrella of manipulation, but they're not the same.
That's something different than propaganda.
Let me ask you.
Exactly. It is different than propaganda.
But it's not.
But it's all manipulation.
Oh, I agree. But propaganda, to me, reaches the level of brainwashing.
And I don't think it does.
I'm actually going to agree with her on this one because
I think
he agreed with you earlier.
I think propaganda can be made without an emotional appeal. I don't think it usually is. I think usually it is brainwashing, but I think it could be. And without that emotional appeal, I don't think it is brainwashing.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I think we can have posters that we can have an amended version of the consent poster where they've both been drinking that just says no means no, or you can't consent after you've been drinking. And I think there's not emotional context there.
I think there is.
And it is propaganda.
I think for propaganda to work, it has to have some kind of emotion to it. And it might be the historian in me, where I know that propaganda comes out of a word that the Catholic Church used in order to influence people to become Catholic. Mm-hmm. That's where it came from. It's where it originated. Mm-hmm. So it originated as we're going to use emotion to convince you to do something. Mm-hmm. So I start looking at this and that might be where I'm coming in here. Yeah. I might be bringing baggage into it.
Now, let me ask you, one of your issues before with saying that primary education, the first education you get, can't be brainwashed because it's not changing your mind. Let me ask you, if I have a blank piece of paper and I write something on that piece of paper, have I changed it?
I don't think that's an analog.
Yeah,
that's not at all.
That's a theory that we had for a long time in education, that everybody came as a blank slate.
Yeah.
And you have to, you got to write on it. You got to give it something. That's pretty much not accepted by education and child psychology now. The idea is that you come with preconceived notions. Even as an infant, mm-hmm. You've got this beliefs, and you've got to change it. Your belief is I need a tit with milk in it. But now all of a sudden, well, no, I need steak. I need this. That's a change. Mm-hmm. There is no blank slate.
Well, and that's fine. And I'm not even arguing the blank slate argument. Mm-hmm. The argument I was addressing was that the first bit of education you got can't be brainwashing because it's not changing your mind.
Yes, it is.
Well, and that's fine. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not addressing reality here. I'm addressing the argument. And my argument is that let's assume for a second, let's throw it out the window and assume the blank slate theory is correct. And if the blank slate theory is correct, isn't a first education a change in your mind?
Yes.
And as I've argued through this whole episode, we're talking about a change antithetical to what was held before. And fine, you can make the argument that nothing to something is antithetical, but I disagree with that. I think if a person comes in and they have no preconceived notion of patriotism, and we tell them that we don't say they have to, but we say they should or they need to stand up for the pledge and recite the pledge, and they need to be patriotic. I don't think that qualifies as brainwashing. And in fact, I think that propaganda at an early age prevents the need for, or has the potential to prevent the need for, brainwashing later.
Yeah, I think she's probably right. And I'm going to give you a real world example. We're going to get away from the pledge. I went to a class over the summer about school safety, and they showed us videos time and again of active shooter situations. And in active shooter situations, full-grown adults, we're talking, 40, 50, 60-year-old people at airports and stuff, when shooting happens, you know what they do? When
Run and scream?
They do not. When somebody shoots, they drop down on the ground, they lay down as close to the ground as they can over and over again. And the reasoning for this that the people suspect is because they've been taught in schools since the 1950s to seek cover during a shooting situation, and it's conditioned them. So I look at that and I go, you know what? There's conditioning that's happened that's made people, and that's not the smartest thing to do. The smartest thing to do is to run like hell. But people are dropping down to the ground and laying there, and they're getting shot over it.
Yeah.
There's got to be a reason for that, and that's conditioning. So I think that kind of supports your idea that first thought can be something that happens.
All right. Fair enough. I do want to talk, and I
want to drink more of this beer.
I understand. I do too. I want to touch on this, and then I think it's probably about time to wrap this up. I think we could go in circles for this for a while.
Yeah.
About two of the issues that I had, and we're getting into a little bit of deeper philosophy here. With the first definitions I heard of brainwashing before this emotional manipulation started to come into play. When talking about the shallower one, then I'll go into the deeper one. One of the things that I kept hearing about brainwashing and what makes it and what doesn't is it requires repetitive, sometimes they call it chants, sometimes they call it mantras, but it requires this really repetitive drilling into your mind of a phrase or a small thing. And the reason I rejected this idea of brainwashing is because we use that so often. And I started thinking of every single thing that we've drilled, that we've committed to memory. Forget the word drilled, that's negative. That we've ever committed to memory, and how much repetitivism and super simplifying of an idea we do until we commit that to memory. So I had a problem because it was such a broad idea that everybody does it. Now here's the real problem I had with the idea of brainwashing before this emotional part came to it. Every person I saw that was speaking on it talks about either a complete loss or a slight or a level of retardation of people's free will in this practice. And I don't think they ever had free will to begin with, so I don't think that we can really argue that.
Okay.
So,
it's a denial of free will by John.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Won't be the first time.
Reference our episodes from earlier this year. The
God.
first 4 of the episode were on free will
Scares the hell
and
out
determinism.
of me. Scares the hell out of me.
So I actually want to take a moment to kind of talk about propaganda and our... No, Cappy. Sorry. The dog was chewing on the wires. I want to take a moment to take a look at propaganda and a kind of movement in society to make it largely, or at least more so, null and void. So one of, in fact, it was H.L. Mencken. No, not Mencken. Mencken said something completely different. But William Sargent said, the best attitude to adopt as far as brainwashing, and he actually talked about brainwashing more in the sense of what I've been calling propaganda. But the best attitude to adopt is not fear, anger, or indignation, but instead irreverence mixed with laughter over the attempts to manipulate the populace.
Check.
Yeah. So he was talking about these efforts to influence the masses of people toward being amenable to things like we were talking about the Patriot Act. Obviously, that was a different time, but things like that. And when I read that, it occurred to me that this is kind of developing in our culture as it is. This idea, we see propaganda, and rather than falling subject to it, we point and laugh and we manipulate it. Let's take a beat to, I think it was USA Today that put out the video of the possible modifications to the rifle that the Vegas shooter was using.
That was wonderful.
And they put out this video that was intended, I think, quite seriously, to make people feel fear. If you hear a pig grunting in the microphone, that's the dog. John picked it up and is holding it now.
If you check us out on YouTube, you can see the dog.
Yeah, she's very cute. But anyway,
damn it.
so we had this video that was intended to strike fear into people, and rather than doing so, these irreverent assholes made the funniest adaptations to those pictures and added all of these ridiculous possible modifications for it.
The chainsaw was awesome.
Yeah. Well, the chainsaw was in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
The chainsaw was awesome, though.
Yeah. But I think we're seeing this attitude more and more of, fuck you, I'll think what I want and I'll do what I want. And when you try to manipulate me, I'm going to shame the shit out of you.
Maybe it's because of the information age. We have so much more information available to us
I think
now.
that's definitely a part of it.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that we've developed this 24-hour news cycle.
And we've become saturated.
Yeah. What's it called? News tired news. Anyway.
Yeah. I can't think now. Yeah.
Weary.
Yeah, news. We'll call it news weary. I know that's not the term we're looking for, but being news weary is a real thing, right? But whenever the news, and it really did, started shifting over to a propaganda machine, whenever different news stations started taking hard sides on issues or political spectrums and became propaganda machines for certain groups of society, and now we have not only a 24-hour news cycle, but a 24-hour brainwashing cycle.
24-hour propaganda.
Misery cycle.
Yeah, you kind of start to become, deaf to it. It's like, everybody else trying.
You think that this is the right way to go, and you guys think this is the right way. Screw both of you.
Somebody else got blown up. Who cares?
Yeah.
And so with that, is that long term going to be a really good thing where we these methods that we know were so effective in affecting people in mass before have now kind of become, we don't go for that anymore? Or do
we see more extreme methods being employed?
Yeah, or is it working, and that's where the polarization of the political spectrum is coming from? I mean, where is this all going? Do we have any thoughts?
I don't know, it scares the hell out of me.
We see things like brands that are seeking. They've used different techniques for implementing brand loyalty for years, and now we're starting to see them becoming part of adopting the kind of counterculture, culture, irreverent ideas, and becoming newly styled brand icons because of it.
Yeah, is that the new brainwashing?
Yeah, is it the new propaganda?
Or is just people singing something refreshing like where Cards Against Humanity
is the best.
Is coming out and getting involved in really political ideas. If you haven't heard, they bought some land along the border wall planning and have hired a lawyer whose only job is to make it difficult for them to build the border wall. We also see Wendy's, who is insulting everybody on Twitter.
It is the best.
And people are loving it, right?
Yeah.
They're getting away from these very... Only thing we're going to push is you should love a sandwich or you should love this game.
Yeah.
And we can't convince you of that anymore. There's just too much competition. So we're just going to take a much smaller segment of the population and appeal to the core beliefs they already have, and then those people will flock to us.
Yeah. So
kind of my theory.
Yeah. So with that, we hope you guys have really enjoyed this episode. I know I've definitely enjoyed it.
I like the beer.
The beer was great. Let us know, do you think that our irreverent and laughable attitude is the antidote to the propaganda disease, or is it the adaptation that is going to make this disease that much stronger and dangerous?
Or
So-
do you think it's a disease at all? You
Yeah, or that.
Is
Maybe
it
it's
just
not
a
a problem.
necessity
Is it
of
just a thing?
society?
Yeah.
Do you not have free will and it doesn't matter anyway? Let us
Come
know.
on, guys. I was trying to propagandize right there.
Hey,
No, I'm kidding.
Before we close off, you want to tell them how they can support the show?
Absolutely. So the easiest way is to just reach down right now and either click that heart, that like button, or the thumbs up, whatever is on your particular app. If you want to hear more of this, if you liked it, why not hear another one? Subscribe to us on whatever platform you're listening. And if you
Hit the
want
bell if you're on YouTube. We promise not to spam you with shit.
and unfortunately, this endeavor has not been free. In fact, we recently had a mic die, so we're gonna have to replace that. We're also
But I feel better.
Yes. We're also looking at moving our location slightly and setting up a little bit more of a studio. But again, it takes time and money. And if you want to get involved as part of the show and get some cool listener perks as well, then you can head on over to patreon.com/sixpackphilosophy. And we have a whole bunch of different levels you can get in on. We also have a Teespring, teespring.com/sixpackphilosophy will take you to our store. We only have, as of recording this, we only have one product, but there's more going to be
One
coming.
style, yeah.
Yeah, there's more that are going to be coming with the new.
You can wear the Six Pack Philosopher brand.
Yes, but we have new branding coming out for the new year. We're the puppy's going crazy. We're working on it, and we'll have new stuff with the new season. So you can check
Sounds
that
good.
out.
Yay.
So are we done, guys?
We're done.
All right. Well,
Say cheers, Cappy.
cheers.
Cheers.
She's just going to chew on my finger.
Six-pack philosophy can be used to treat closed-mindedness, straight-ticket voting, and faulty reasoning. Side effects of six-pack philosophy may include questioning the status quo, thinking for oneself, and erectile dysfunction. Ask your bartender if six-pack philosophy is right for you. And as always, keep on drinking and thinking. This has been Six-Pack Philosophy.